Hi, so I recently got married to my boyfriend of 2 years a week ago. I'm 25 and I thought that he was 29, but he's not. We first met through a dating app and he was really charming and sweet, so we started dating. He moved in with me 3 months after that because he thought that the commute from his place to mine was unnecessarily long. And my place was also a lot closer to his workplace. I wasn't ready at the time, but he talked me into it somehow, and soon enough I was making a lot of changes in my life to accommodate him. I was fine with it though because I loved him and I thought he loved me too. We had a joint bank account within a year of being together, and I was paying for like 75% of his expenses because I was the one who earned more. For context, I'm the head of marketing at a firm and have a decent income, and he's a freelance graphic designer. He's been trying to make it big as a blogger but hasn't had any luck so far and relies on me heavily to cover his bills. He does tend to splurge a lot, but whenever I'd bring that up, he'd talk to me real sweetly and I'd melt. He asked me to get married 6 months ago, and I agreed against my family's will, and they didn't like him much because he was too dependent on me financially, but I thought that was just them being regressive. Men can rely on women financially too, so I fought with them over it and managed to get them to come around by the time we got hitched. He only has one parent that I know of, his dad, and doesn't have much family because his dad ran away from home when he got married to my boyfriend's mom. His parents got divorced when he was 13 because his mother had allegedly cheated on his dad with their neighbor. They moved away from that neighborhood afterward, and his dad took over his upbringing because apparently his mother didn't want custody of him anymore and only wanted to be with her new boyfriend. They haven't been in touch since then, and he doesn't know what she's been up to in these past years either. This is what he told me. Now, a week before the wedding was supposed to take place, I started receiving a bunch of calls and texts from numbers and profiles I had never seen before. I ignored all of those because I thought it was just people trying to scam me or something, and I was very busy with the wedding prep too, so I had no time to worry about these things. On the day before the wedding, around the evening, a woman I didn't recognize showed up at my doorstep with a letter in her hand. My soon-to-be ex-husband was not at home because he was supposed to spend the night at the hotel we were getting married at, so we wouldn't run into each other before the ceremony. I didn't recognize her, so I told her that I wasn't willing to have any guests over for the day. But she then told me that she was actually my husband's mom, my estranged mother-in-law-to-be, and said that she needed to talk to me about something very important. I didn't want to talk to her because I'd heard enough about her from my husband, so I turned her away very rudely after she insisted on speaking to me. She tried to tell me that her son was not the guy I thought he was, and asked me to leave him. She claimed she had proof and had explained everything in the letter she'd brought with her, but I got really irritated and slammed the door shut without even reading the letter. She left after a while, and I told my husband about it through text after she was gone. He told me that I'd done the right thing because his mother was a known liar and couldn't believe that she was back again to ruin his life. The next day we got married without a hitch, and we forgot about his mom's visit to me the previous day. Nothing much had changed in the days following, but I began to receive many more calls, texts, and even emails, which I never bothered to read because I had zero interest in getting to know what that woman had to say. I knew about her alleged past, so I just assumed that whatever she had to say to me would be all lies anyway. Then 3 days ago, I received a letter in my mail which took me by surprise because it was the same one that I'd seen my mother-in-law with the other day. I could no longer ignore her attempts to get me to read her side of the story because nobody is this desperate without a reason. I'd taken a sick leave that day, and my husband had gone out to visit a couple of his friends, so it was just me alone at home, and the coast was clear for me to read the letter without any interruptions. So I started reading, and I'm so grateful that I didn't ignore her any longer because she most definitely saved me from my husband. She'd found my social media when a friend of hers told her that her son was now apparently engaged. Probably someone from my friend list was somehow related to my mother-in-law's friend, and that's how the news eventually made it to her. She did some stalking and managed to find out a lot about me, including my phone number, email address and even my home address. She didn't tell me in her letters how she managed to do it, but it sure was creepy, and I almost threw it away then and there to get out of my house, but I knew I had to finish reading somehow. So long story short, apparently my husband isn't the man I'd thought he was at all. He's 8 years older than me, not 4, like the way he'd led me to believe all these years. He can pass off as younger because he works out and just takes really good care of himself and his body. He's not a graphic designer at all, but a con artist who preys on younger women, love bombs them, and gets them to pay for his expenses. Unfortunately, I've been the only one stupid enough to take things as far as marriage. She'd attached proof of his birth as well as some texts that he'd exchanged with a couple of other women many years back, which is what led his mother to get divorced and make a run for it when she found out about their business of scamming women for their own greed. In fact, my husband apparently even had a 3-year-old son who lives with his ex-girlfriend, but he has to pay child support for him, which is being covered by me so far. She'd attached proof of that as well. And the whole story that he'd fed me about his mother cheating and stuff had also been a lie, obviously. She told me that her son had never been to college and never worked, but always seemed to have money on him, and had even started paying rent and bills at home, so she'd gone digging through his phone and laptop and discovered his sources of money, which happened to be a bunch of women whom he was flirting with left, right, and center, and telling them all sorts of lies to get them to send him some money. This was almost 15 to 20 years ago, so her memory isn't that great, but she does remember that even then. He had no remorse about it and said that he just manipulated them, but their relationship had been consensual, so they couldn't hold it against him. And I guess that was true. His mom didn't like that, but his dad didn't see anything wrong with it and agreed that this was fair game as long as he brought the money home. So that's why she filed for divorce and cut them out of her life. They moved out of the neighborhood they used to live in, and she lost track of them until 6 years back when his ex-girlfriend somehow found out where his mom lived and contacted her to tell her she was pregnant. My husband had borrowed some amount of money from the woman and then ghosted her, but once she discovered she was pregnant, she decided to track him down somehow, and they were able to do so after a couple of days with the help of the cops. She took him to court and made sure he paid child support. But lucky for him, he found me within a year of the verdict, and I became his new source of money. Even early on in the relationship, he used to borrow money from me almost every single day, but made sure it was small amounts so I wouldn't suspect anything. I never added it up. But if I were to do that now, it must have been a significant amount of money every week that he took from me. Then we set up a joint bank account too. We promised that we'd set aside 30% of our salaries there for the future, but of course his 30% wasn't the same as my 30%, and I was the one contributing more. But I was okay with it because I loved him and was willing to keep money aside for our future. So I continued to do it without question, and only now am I realizing how incredibly stupid someone has to be to do something like that. I've been covering all his expenses for the last 2 years without taking into consideration that there's something very wrong with this whole arrangement that he's come up with. After I was done reading the letter, I immediately packed my essential belongings and some clothes, then got into my car and drove to a hotel a little out of town. I was shuddering the entire time thinking about what I had just discovered and couldn't imagine being in that house one more second. I blocked my husband on my way there because I just didn't want to hear anything that he had to say at the moment. I just wanted to put as much distance as I could between me and him, so I just kept driving until I reached the hotel I'm currently in. Once I was there, I wasted no time and called up my dad to fill him in on whatever I'd found out. I thought that they'd tell me, "I told you so," but they didn't. So thank God for that, because that would have been humiliating. I told him to put me in touch with a lawyer immediately because I wanted myself out of this mess at the earliest. Within 2 hours, my dad had put me in touch with his friend's son, who was a practicing attorney who specializes in divorces. I told him everything and sent him the letter and whatever proof my mother-in-law had attached as well, and just the day before, we'd filed the divorce petition. In the meantime, my husband had tried every single method in existence to talk to me, from making fake profiles and texting me to using his friends' phone numbers, but none of that had worked because I hung up and blocked people like nobody's business during the last 2 days, and that brings us to today. I didn't want anyone to know where I was, so I'd only told my parents about it. But a few hours ago, I received a call from the front desk of the hotel that my husband was here to see me, and so I had to go down to talk to him. I didn't know how he'd found out where I was, but he told me that he'd visited every single hotel in the vicinity over the past 2 days to find out where I was so he could talk to me. Earlier, I might have found that romantic or endearing, but now it just felt creepy because he wasn't really looking for his wife. He was looking for the woman who paid all his bills, and that was it. I told him that we were done and that he'd be served with the divorce papers soon enough. He even had the audacity to ask me why, so I told him that I'd met his mother a couple of days back and I expected him to look surprised, but instead he just laughed and told me not to believe that old kook stories, that she just had it in for him and wanted to ruin him somehow, so she was going out of her way to stir up trouble for him. I didn't believe that and told him that I was going ahead with the divorce because I had proof that he was lying and I trusted his mother more than him, now that I could finally see the way he'd been scamming me. I said it out loud, and that's when he started looking really upset. He told me that I was making a mistake and that I'd regret this later, but I just stuck up my middle finger and walked off. He just texted me like an hour ago from a different number, and I finally opened the text to read it. He said he was disappointed that I'd rather believe some woman I'd never met before over him, even after spending 2 whole years with him, and the way I turned him away today without even hearing his side of things had been very hurtful. And now I don't know who's telling the truth and whom to believe. I guess he does have a point about me choosing to believe his mother over him because I haven't known her for as long as him, and neither has she tried to contact me after the day I received the letter. But that's probably because this was a last-ditch effort to get me to pay heed to her. AITA for believing my estranged mother-in-law over my husband, whom I'd been with for 2 years? Update 1. Hey, thank you so much for the response. I'm safe now, so thanks to everyone who is very worried about my safety. The hotel has pretty tight security, so nobody can get through without my prior consent. My husband knows where I am, true, but he cannot get to me, and I feel a lot better knowing that for sure. So he's been served with the divorce papers but hasn't replied to them yet because he's probably still struggling to come to terms that he's lost me for good. He'd been trying to talk to me constantly, but I'd warned him not to harass me, or I'll go to the cops, and that would be yet another feather in his cap. It's just been a week since I posted it, and I've been receiving endless legal advice and messages, but there's also been people who have called me stupid and even said that I deserved all of this for being so foolish. I'm not saying I wasn't stupid, but let me just give you guys a story about what happened to me in the past before you guys jump to conclusions about me. 5 years ago when I was 20, I started dating this guy from college who seemed to be really into me. He was a lot better looking than I was, but he was still into me for some reason. We dated for almost 1.5 years, but then I caught him cheating on me in my own apartment with a friend of mine. I broke up with him on the spot. But instead of being apologetic, he made fun of me and my looks, my weight, and even my family before he finally left. He reminded me of all my insecurities and then told me that he was too good for me anyway. It took me years to build up my self-esteem after that. And then, of course, when I met my soon-to-be ex, who practically worshipped the ground I walked on, I didn't think twice and committed to him because in my head, I wasn't worthy of any love at all. So that's what had happened in the past, and I hope that now some of you guys can make sense of why I'd been ignoring all the red flags that seemed so obvious right from the beginning. I'd been willing to ignore it all because, after ages, I'd finally thought I had found a guy who loved me for who I was. Of course, it turned out not to be true, but while I was with him, I believed it and was ready to do whatever it took to be with him and make him stay. It's desperate, but that's what my last relationship did to me. I've just never had a good relationship with myself, and that's led to a lot of heartbreaks for me. This being the biggest one, so please think twice before you just say that I deserve this. I didn't, and neither does anyone else, because this feels like crap. On a better note, I did get back to my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law. I finally opened some of the emails and texts that she'd sent me in the past before the letter and realized that she'd attached her contact info to those messages. So I reached out to her to thank her and tell her about the divorce a few days back. We've been in touch since then, and she's promised to convince my husband's ex-girlfriend to provide evidence that I'd been lied to about my husband's past to make the divorce easier. I just do not want him to get any alimony, which might happen, because he'll certainly demand it. He has barely any income in comparison to me, so I don't know. I might have to pay him. I don't want to, and my attorney has promised me that it's unlikely, but you never really know. Update 2. I recently moved out of the hotel and back in with my parents, who have been so supportive ever since I told them about the divorce. My husband doesn't know that I'm back here, but I had no other option. I can't go back home because he's still there and the hotel was getting too expensive for me. He's responded to the petition and he's demanding that I let him keep the money from our joint account in the settlement, which is absolutely not acceptable to me. We're meeting a mediator in a few days to start negotiating, but I don't think he stands a chance even. My mother-in-law has been really kind and helpful. My parents expressed their thankfulness towards her when she visited the other day along with my husband's ex-girlfriend and their son. It was so weird to meet them all in my house and felt like some strange illegal crossover. But they were nice enough, even though it was very awkward for all of us involved. She'd brought along sufficient proof to show that it was indeed my husband who was the father of their child, and it was satisfactory enough for both my attorney and I. After we were done with the legal stuff, my mother-in-law told us about how her husband and her son had both been good-for-nothing idiots their entire lives. Her husband, my father-in-law, had relied on her income for most of his life because she was a lot more successful than he was. He'd been a failed copywriter in his time, just like his son was a failure as a graphic designer right now, and had relied on her, a restaurant manager. At least I earned more than her and could support her, but she didn't make enough to carry her deadbeat husband and no good son, so there were already enough problems for her to deal with without also having to worry about her son's weird knack for getting women to give him money. There were a lot of things that forced her to abandon her family, but her adult son scammed women with promises of relationships and love just for money, and her husband supporting this like it's sustainable and ethical business idea is what drove her over the edge, which was fair enough. It would drive anyone over the edge, if I'm being honest. After she left, she didn't have any contact with her son and husband until his ex-girlfriend got pregnant. She's the one who helped track him down along with the cops, and he's always been mad at her for forcing him to take accountability and be a responsible dad to the child he'd helped bring into this world. His girlfriend also seemed like a nice, capable, and independent woman. They were all sympathetic towards me, and it felt great to be understood for once instead of judged. Update 3. My soon-to-be ex-husband and I met the mediator today, and the meeting did not go over well for him. My attorney brought up all the lies he told me over the years with proof, so the scales are pretty much tilted in my favor right now. I came back home feeling quite victorious, but that feeling didn't last long because within minutes of my return, my husband was also at my door. He'd followed me home and looked furious. I refused to open the door to him, and my parents threatened to call the cops on him, but he stayed and told me that I had no right to bring up his son here because he had nothing to do with our relationship. It was so ridiculous. I almost opened the door just to slap some sense into him, but stopped myself just in time. I said I'd call the cops, so he left. but not before he kicked the door as hard as he could. It was stupid of him because that just hurt his own foot and nothing really happened to the door. But he's an idiot anyway, so I don't expect much from him. My parents have decided to amp up the security around the house because now that he knows I'm here, I'm sure he won't leave any stone unturned to get on my nerves. I don't know what joy he got out of what he did today, but he's prone to temper tantrums like any other deadbeat good-for-nothing loser, so I'm not surprised. My attorney told me that if he tries to contact me again or comes near me again, then I should record it and we'll have more evidence against him for our case. We'll also have enough cause to file for a restraining order against him, so he'll be forced to stay away from me on a more permanent basis. And I think that's a good idea. I'm hoping that he doesn't try anything funny after this, but even if he does, I'll try to capture it and get some proof of it, so getting a restraining order becomes easier for me. I'm also thinking about going public with what happened to me after the divorce is finalized, or at least the settlement is over, because I don't think anyone should go through what I did. People like him need to be named and shamed. Update 4. It's been ages since I updated you guys, but I've been busy, so I guess that's forgiven. I'm done with the divorce. It was finalized just a couple of days back, and as of today, I'm a single woman. He didn't get any alimony on account of his lies, and instead he's the one who has to pay me back the amount I spent on him throughout these years. Yay for me. I'm still in touch with his mother and his ex. We're friends and check up on each other like a support group of sorts. I'm happy that I met these women because they've been a great support system alongside my parents and friends. I've moved into a separate apartment now and I'm living on my own. It's kind of scary, but he doesn't know where I am anymore. And the security this building has is great. So I'm not too worried. Stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships.